Hello, ladies. So first, thank you guys. I'm sure this isn't the first time you've been asked to be on a panel of women. It's an interesting time, I think, for all of us that this is getting as much attention as it is. So first, I'd like to just start out kind of going down and talking a little bit about, what it is that you do in your day-to-day job, because I think what makes us exceptional is truly what we do, not the fact that we're women, but the really incredible work. So just a little synopsis of that for everybody.
Sure. Am I starting?
Yes.
Hi. My name is Chen. My day job is in a field called developer relations. Stacey and I actually work in a similar field, not same company. What I do is I was previously in a previous lifetime a developer, but I realized what I was really good at was communicating how technology works. So a lot of the times I work on more tech education. So right now I work with Intel and I help them sort of advocate for their IoT platforms. So I attend a lot of hackathons. As a mentor, I create a lot of onboarding material for them and generally just get people excited to use Intel technologies.
I'm Stacey Mulcahy. I sound ridiculous right now because I'm super sick, so enjoy it while you can. I work for Microsoft. I'm what's called the worst title in the world, Technical Evangelist. I don't know what it means. If you don't either, that's okay. I'm a developer who talks to developers. I'm basically just charged with getting people interested in development, however that might be Microsoft products. Typically it's not. So that's kind of what I do.
Cool. So I'm Catt Small, and I'm a product designer at SoundCloud. I also do a lot of fun engineering stuff, but mostly front-end things. I focus on monetization, which means anything from like how people purchase different subscriptions on SoundCloud, but it also means things like ads. I already apologized for this earlier, but sorry, ads. And in addition, I also have a lot of outside fun stuff like making video games and teaching people to program stuff.
I'm Irene Pereyra. I'm a UX director / designer. And I have my own company together with Anton, who's sitting right there, and we are called Anton and Irene, because that's our names. And I wore pink specifically for this panel, so I hope you appreciate it. I will say this, it's a bit weird to be up here to talk about women's stuff, because I am probably not very, like the perfect candidate for that, though I am a woman. I don't really care about that stuff that much. So I think I might be the one person here that you guys will be shocked to hear things from, but Kim already knows this. So.
No, I think that's important. I think that you and I are similar in that regard, that it wasn't really something that we thought about until we got asked about it. Yeah. And I'm very curious to hear the answers across everyone. So Kim Alpert, I'm the director of digital technology, creative technology for DCI Art Forum. I build interactive interiors, and I've been in digital strategy and creative for a long time. So I'm kind of curious, starting especially after your comment, Irene, when you guys started out, were you aware that this was going to be a very male-dominated kind of field? Was this a thing that you were like very conscious of starting out in your career? And if so, kind of how did that feel? And what was was there an aha moment around it?
Me starting?
Sure, anybody.
Okay, so I think obviously we're all women, but firstly we're all humans, so that's very important, and we're all, the fact that we're women is kind of, in my mind, irrelevant. And I grew up in Northern Europe, where I think women issues were fought out by the generation before me quite successfully. So when I was a child, it wasn't weird that you would want to study engineering or you would want to study anything within technology. It wasn't discouraged. It wasn't anything that was strange. And when I came to the US and I started studying engineering, actually, I was like, oh my God, I'm like the only girl in this entire class. And it was the first time where I was aware of it, because rightly or wrongly so, all of a sudden I was like, is the US behind on this stuff, or is it culturally different? But as a European woman, I never felt like I had to be this perfect little princess. But then as my sister was growing up in the States, and I saw the way she was being marketed, with girly things, I was like, wow, that's a tough thing to have to, carry with you from a very young age, to be marketed specifically as a girl, Here's a pen and it's pink because you're a girl, And for me, that was kind of strange. So, yes, I became aware of it in school. And then I actually felt that it was a huge advantage because it became like that thing where, you're the token woman in things, which you can be angry about or you can take advantage of. And I think I went the route of taking advantage of it. And I'm very well aware that because it's a very male-dominated field, I actually get invited to a lot more things, than probably I maybe should be, just because I'm a woman. And is that right? Is that wrong? Should people get scholarships based on their race, on their gender, on their whatever? But it's happening. It's the world we live in. So I'm not a, bitter person or anything, but to me that's like, great, So it's actually an advantage now. And I think that's important, we shouldn't sort of pretend that we're all, in an equal position. We're not, And I don't claim that we are, but we also shouldn't feel like we're necessarily in a worse position. We're just in a different position.
Yeah. So in terms of how I got into it and how my experience kind of went, I started messing with technology when I was very young because my parents didn't really listen to American marketing, actually, and they were just like, computers are the future. Here, girl child, you're the only child we have. Go technology. And I was like, awesome, gonna do it. So I started I was really artistic as a kid, still into like arts and comics and stuff. So I was like drawing these original characters, found a way to be able to make like interactive dress-up dolls, which was my first foray into like animation and interactivity. And then I started making websites. So that's kind of the way I found my way into the stuff that I'm doing now. I was also playing a lot of video games and things like that, and I didn't really notice as a kid that any kind of like specific gender imbalance, although when I got older it got weird to be the only girl and the only woman constantly in these groups of people. So it was only when I got to be about 20-something or like 20-ish, when I was like in late college, when I started realizing, wow, when I go to these engineering schools to hang out with my friends, I'm often the only woman in the room, and that is really strange to have to deal with. So I actually went to a graphic design school and got into programming like in the traditional sense later through a lot of experimentation and things like that. And I think later it kind of started to affect me a little bit more because I realized like, oh, there were a lot of things that I was taught as a younger woman, like, for example, marketing of stuff. Like when I was younger, I was like, ew, I hate pink, and now I have a pink jacket, so that didn't work out very well. But I also got taught things like don't trust other women and, stuff like that, and I had to kind of take that out of me, and it took a very long time for me to be able to do that because when you're socialized to kind of fight with other people who have similar experiences to you, it takes a lot to kind of unlearn all of that. So that was one of the most interesting things that happened to me when I got older.
I'm just gonna look at you. I got into technology by accident, and I don't think I think I was always like aware that I was the only female around, but I had so many good friends, and I developed so many good relationships through the community. I like Brandon Hall, who's here, was like one of my biggest allies of all time, and so I've always had these friendships I developed, and I never really thought about it. I didn't want to think about it, to be honest. And I think it was only until the last couple of years where I started to be like, just things that were, maybe I just became a little bit more sensitive over time. I'm a very outspoken person. I have no problem telling anyone my opinion. And I started to realize that not everyone is like me, nor should they be. And yeah, this was a big realization for me, if you can imagine. And so enabling people who, communicate in different ways to have their voice heard was like just a huge thing for me, where I realized that like, wow, that person got promoted, and yet that person's extremely qualified. And I think that was the first time where I was like, some of this is a little bit bullshit. But, you know, I spent many years in the industry never ever thinking about it and not wanting to. And even today, I don't really, I just want people to respect me for my technical skills more so than the parts I bring to the table. It's true, right? Like, I would rather be known as a developer than a female developer. Like, why are you putting the modifier in front of it? There's no need. Like, my femaleness doesn't add to it. Well, maybe it does, I don't know.
Yeah, I was a little bit hesitant to be on this panel because I had been invited to quite a few women in tech panels, and it's like, why don't we have a panel about robots? I would love to be on a panel about robots instead of talking about women. But I think it's one of these unfortunate things where as I've gotten later into my career, I have noticed this sort of difference of being a minority in the tech field. So I actually grew up with 3 older brothers, so that kind of skewed my approach to life because I was always a tomboy. I always played sports. And so I kind of grew up with like all these like male influences in my life, and I'm also an immigrant, so like my childhood was very confusing because my parents had like no idea of like what the culture was. So they would, you know, want me to dress up in pink, but then also make sure that I aced all my math classes and stuff like that. So it was very conflicting. I had a weird childhood, but I did start programming when I was 13, and I can sort of parallel me thinking that I didn't really belong as a computer scientist or a programmer because I didn't really see anyone else that was like me. And I can parallel this to maybe like TV and media because when I look at TV and media, there are no other like Chinese women who are actresses who are prominent. And so when I kind of reflect back to growing up, because I didn't see any role models who were in technology, I didn't really feel that I belonged. I did go to computer science for a semester. I did drop out, partially because I wanted something, at that time I thought I wanted something more creative, even though computer sciences actually can be very creative. But I did kind of feel that I was an odd person out because my classes were quite male-dominated. So I did drop out. You know, I went through art school instead, an art and technology school, and I really didn't notice much of the gender stuff. I really didn't think about it because it was an advantage for me because, you know, I was good at my job. I got the jobs that I wanted. But it wasn't until probably the pivotal moment was when I started mentoring and teaching with ladies learning code, because up until that point, I had thought, you know, this stuff is maybe easy. Like, why isn't there more women here? And so as I started teaching more and more with ladies learning code and meeting, you know, hundreds of women, I started realizing and listening to their stories and how they do feel that there is a barrier. And so then I became much more aware of it. So over the past 4 or 5 years, I've become like acutely aware of all these gender differences. And so I've been quite an advocate for women in technology, but it wasn't really until that pivotal moment where I started talking to like much more women who wanted to get into tech but felt that they couldn't.
Yeah, I will actually also say like, how I mentioned that like a lot of me and other women were like kind of socialized to when you're, you know, used to being the only woman there, and then another woman comes in and you kind of like. So that's something I realized was a thing that I needed to help stop. So when this really great person named Phoenix Perry came to me and was like, hey, you know, women in games, there aren't very many. I'm tired of being the only woman at a conference and getting, you know, called or asked if I'm like the marketing person or the booth babe when I actually developed the game. Would you want to work on this with me? And I was like, yeah, I'll try that out. That sounds really cool. And you know, we started running classes that were specifically for women so that we could teach them how to program. And a lot of the people who came to our classes were people who had dropped out or stopped because they were tired of being the only one there, or, you know, they were just tired of having like negative comments said to them, or like their teachers were being terrible to them. And that's when I also realized like, wow, this is a serious problem that is like, you know, just systemically, like people are being pulled out, even though this is something that they find incredibly interesting. They're just not being treated very well, and this is something that really needs to change. Like, it's not even always a small comment. Sometimes it's just someone blatantly being terrible. So that's when I kind of realized that a lot of work needed to be done, and that even just bringing people into a classroom where they can feel comfortable and not like they're going to be judged helps a lot.
I think you guys touched on some really interesting things, particularly in the change that we've seen probably from when we all started maybe 10, 15 years ago to what we're seeing now, you know, 4 or 5 years in the recent history of women in digital. And I'm curious, you know, what you guys think about that difference, and if, something that I consider is kind of this unicorn mentality of when you truly are the only one, it's a little bit easier. But as there is this critical mass of women breaking into the industry, that maybe it's harder now. And just wondering, what kind of advice or situations from your early career, and then we'll talk a little bit about later career as things change and you're trying to move up, do you kind of remember or recall?
I can kind of think that if you're a senior in technology right now, it's because you probably had a bit of a privilege of having a computer growing up. Not everyone got that privilege, and I find that most women that I speak to never had the privilege of growing up with a computer. So they're entering into sort of programming as a second career, like they're switching over. So I think that's kind of the big difference I see, where there's a lot more men who are in senior positions simply because they grew up with a computer. Like, I was lucky because my brother advocated for a computer and I had one growing up. But I just see, that's the biggest difference now, where now that you can have such a great career and a well-paid job in technology, a lot of people are switching into the career. But it's when you're approaching it from a second career or switching from something, it's a lot harder to get into, I think, than something that you just grew up with.
I'll touch on something that you said, Catt, which I think is, not this doesn't happen to me, but I hear this from other women a lot, is that it's the other women that are actually causing the problems and not the men. And to your point, where it's like, if you're the only woman, actually, I've never, it's like, great, who cares? You're the only woman, there's a lot of guys in the room, it might be a little bit weird, but okay. And then I think the difference now is that there are a lot more women, so the competition between women, therefore, is becoming maybe more intense. And I think, at least for me, I feel like I'm not part of that generation because I was often the only woman. And so the only women I know were also often the only women. So we all kind of are in the same boat. But now as I look at the younger generation, especially the designers that I've hired or how they interact, there seems to be almost like a jockeying for position, because now it's like, okay, there's 10 women or 8 women, and now what does it mean? Can you still say, does it now matter? Does it not matter? Who gets promoted? Like, it becomes almost like a more difficult gauntlet for the younger generation, I think, than it was for us, because I feel like as sort of pioneers, just purely because of the age that we are, we were forced to sort of knock down a lot of doors. So the type of women who succeeded were the types of women who were comfortable with knocking down doors, Like, typically the women I know, my generation, who are in tech, are quite, outspoken, and because they kind of needed to be. But now it's like, do we still need that? Do we still need to be loud about it? Do we still need to demand a seat at the table? Maybe not. So if you don't anymore, then what does it mean for all the other women in the room? And I think that's that whole dynamic of how an agency is run now and how it was maybe 10 years ago is very, very different, And just one last note, like, I hired a lot of UX designers in our previous agency at FI, and I did notice that out of all the departments, so I ran UX, Anton ran design, we had a guy who ran technology, I always had the most women in the team. And it was kind of strange. Like, I didn't do it on purpose. I'm sure they didn't do it on purpose. But or maybe UX is just more, there's just more women. But consistently, there were always more women in my team than in the other teams. And at some point, we would joke about that. Like, why is that? Are you guys not getting good female candidates? Am I looking specifically for women? So I think we also do a lot of things subconsciously, and we don't really consider it and think about it. But I do like to think that ultimately, and maybe I'm delusional, I look at talent first and foremost. And whatever gender or race or age is attached to that should really be irrelevant. But in reality, of course, things are not that simple, right? You do see those things, and you maybe subconsciously do consider those aspects.
Yeah, I'll touch on something you said a couple lines back about women and more women, and you see this behavior, and sometimes women are the worst. Like, they can be your best friend or your worst enemy, and I'm okay making that stereotype because, in the last couple years, I've made a very conscious effort about not taking every opportunity that comes my way to me. And I could just grab every single opportunity and eat it all up and be very successful. And I've made a very conscious effort of giving other people opportunity. Like, hey, Catt, you'd be great for this conference. Like, I don't need this speaking slot, True story, right? Like, things like that. Like, doing those kind of things, because I feel like right now there's these two behaviors I'm seeing most often. One is the people who bring you up when they're climbing the ladder, and then it's the other ones who are holding you down. I don't think that's gender specific, but I definitely do see it a lot more in women than I think that I did in the beginning, and it's disheartening. And so I think one of the things to think about is creating opportunities for others. Gender doesn't matter, but creating opportunities for others should be really important to what you do, because taking it all for yourself doesn't really contribute back to anything to anyone. And that behavior, when you see it, it's it's not the men that make me want to leave the industry sometimes, right? It's just people, because sometimes people just suck.
Yeah, so that's definitely a really interesting point. So one thing that I would like to comment on is, one thing I think I learned early is, as I mentioned earlier, there's like these things that women are kind of taught to do through things like media, through parenting books and things that our parents are told, or just generational things that are kind of passed down. And so there would be times when I, wanted to, I really like the theory that Stacey has about pulling other people up. I think it's very important to do that. And I think that, just again, this has been a process for me of just unlearning a lot of things. So one of them has definitely been making sure to not say yes to every single thing, although it is great to say yes to things. But firstly, you get really tired. And secondly, it's also great to pass things on, because then you develop relationships with other people. And it's great to have other women to talk to who are supporting you, because you actually need a support network. So as people were mentioning, there is a different kind of sexism that exists. There's the micro kind where it just kind of hurts you and you keep thinking about it and you can't focus on your work. And that's the kind that's more common now. So by having people who make friends with the women that you work with, or at least build a support network with them or someone else, because there will be times when you need them and you need someone who understands your experience, who you can talk with and say, did that just happen? Is that okay? What is going on right now? And that's been one of the best things that I've been able to do, is make sure to just build as many networks of women that I can talk to and really ask questions to and listen to, and just kind of commiserate about the experience that we're having, because it is different now. I've been somewhere in the middle as a person who started really young, and it's just learning to support other people rather than pulling them down or things like that has been really mind-blowing. Because as an example, there was an interesting company that I worked at, and the person who was hiring us was a guy, and he wanted to hire women on his team, but he didn't change the culture of the actual team itself, and so it was still this cigar smoking, beer drinking party fest. And so I was kind of are y'all okay with this? And the other one woman was just I just need to make money, and so I'm gonna go with this. And the other person was just hell yeah, we're gonna, this is totally fine. And I was just this is not okay. So, there's just really make sure to also examine what you're okay with, and are you okay with that culture? Why are you okay with that? And if you can build that support network, it helps endlessly.
Can I actually, both of you kind of touched upon where there's slots available for women, and I find that really interesting. Is there anyone here Master of None fan, the TV show? So there's a really great episode in Master of None where it's Indians on TV, where they're competing for a spot on a sitcom, and there's two friends competing for this same spot. But they're why does it have to just be one Indian person on this TV show? Why can't it just be two people? But then from the producer standpoint, they're well, if we put two Indian people on this TV show, then it becomes a show about Indians. So it seems really weird that we kind of think that there's only certain slots available. And I think going down to culture, we have to start knocking down those barriers of like who we expect to be filling these so-called slots. I can kind of parallel it to when you're applying for a conference. There is one conference that I won't name, but they want to get more women submitting their talk. And it's like, I've had conflicts with this organizer where I was like, well, who can submit to this talk? And they only want experts. But a lot of women don't think they're experts. So you have to approach the application process very differently because most women don't think that people want to hear them talk, where most men do think that people want to hear what they have to say. So they'll more readily apply to a conference. And then it's like, what is an expert? Like, as long as you have a problem and you had a solution and a good way and a story to tell, then you should be up on this stage, like telling your story. But I think there's a lot of definitions around like who can tell their stories, and it tends to lean more towards letting men speak and women being quiet.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. And I think that gets into some of that, how you were raised, and that cultural feeling of, can I have a voice? Can I speak up? So something I'd like to talk about a little bit is kind of later career issues, because we have all these incredible women in the audience today that are going to be basically taking over everything. And one of the phrases that I think we've all heard time and time again is the idea of a glass ceiling. And we touched a little bit about being loud, and women who are going to push down the door and fight down the door. And I think there's an interesting tension about getting ahead as a woman, especially in a leadership position. And I think how you navigate between she's a bitch, or she's strong, and the tension between those two words, being a male or a female leader, I think is something our advice could probably be very useful on.
I struggle with that one every day. I'm so blunt, and people take it the wrong way, and it's so hard because people, she's very aggressive, and I'll be like, I think you mean assertive. She's a bitch. You damn right I am. Because I have a voice and you're going to hear it. It's one of those things that I struggle with a lot. And right now, it's for me, I'm a very blunt person. I say what I think. My emails are fairly short. I work in a company where we're a culture of email, where you have to start off with, hello, whoever, blah, blah. Like, you've got to be very polite and systematic. And, I haven't bought into the system yet. Still haven't gotten fired. Still time. They could possibly see this. But I think one of the things about the idea of a glass ceiling is that I do think that you can experience it. You can experience it in certain areas. And I worked at an agency before where I was completely qualified to be the director of technology or take over something along those lines or move on up in the industry. And no, never, ever considered, even though I voiced it, because you never get what you don't ask for. That's another thing that I would say is that you need to make sure that, don't sit back and wait for it to come to you. You got to voice what you're interested in. And so, okay, there's a glass ceiling here. I'm not going to get what I want. I'm not, even though I'm qualified and for whatever reason. That's the other thing. It's advice I've given recently. If someone tells you you're not qualified for something, or we considered you, but we want you to do this, this, and this, don't let people talk in abstracts. Make them give you definitive checklist items. What do you need to improve? Like, what are the things? As soon as they start to talk in abstract, they're no longer accountable for their words. Whereas if you're like, I want to get promoted, what do I need to do? They need to give you that checklist. So at the end of the year, you can say, I've done this checklist. What is keeping me from, going further? And so, for me, it was just like, okay, I'm going to change routes of what I'm doing. And I'm very fortunate. I work in a company now where you are evaluated based on performance. You are evaluated based on what you contribute. And so for me, I feel like there isn't a glass ceiling where I'm at currently because it's about your performance and it's not about, these little kind of subjective indicators. And, coming from advertising and coming from, digital media, I felt like I had so much of that, so.
Yeah, I will second all of that. It's funny because I generally consider myself to, yes, be a very respectful person, but also pretty honest about things. So if something's stupid, I'm going to tell you that's like not a good idea, or like, here's what maybe we should rethink this or whatever. And I still got called nice, and I got called too nice. And I was like, what does that even mean? Can we like describe a situation in which I was too nice? And the person who told me that was like, I don't actually know. Like, so yeah, just asking for real examples is very important because it makes people start thinking about why they said something to you. And being too nice can kind of be a bit of a gendered thing, especially for me being a Black woman. Like, there's a really fine balance between being the angry Black woman and like, you know, just being too nice. Like, it feels like there isn't really an in-between. Like, so I try to be very respectful as a person just because that's the way I was taught to be as a human being. Like, you know, you want to tell something to somebody, but do it in a way that's productive. And usually being, like, for me, the most productive way to do that is to figure out how to communicate with them. And it usually works to be, you know, like, kind of like, I respect you as a person, but here's the deal. So, yeah, like, you just kind of, for me, I learned to deal with these weird things, and I'm still figuring out, like, what is the right balance of, like, vocality. I always ask for what I want, and I've been doing that more and more, and I feel like that's definitely been very beneficial. So even if it makes you feel uncomfortable, you are going to have to tell people what you want, and if they don't give you that thing, like, ask them why they didn't, and if they give you a weird answer, ask them why they said that, and ask for examples as soon as you possibly can, because they will probably say something stupid.
I like, he just like rambled off. It'll probably take
Man.
Yeah, so I definitely agree that there is a glass ceiling. I feel it on occasion, but I think I've been able to do very well in my career because I know how to play the game, and I think that's unfortunate because you have to know that there's a game to play. So I'm pretty good at, you know, figuring out the best way to talk to people to get them to do the things that I want. So it is a skill that I guess is, as a woman, it feels might be like manipulative, but I'm just playing the game. I just want to get ahead. But I don't know if this is something other people experience. Maybe Irene, maybe you started your own company, and I'm finding that to get what I really want, I have to start my own company. So I've been freelance for the last 8 years. And when I kind of compare myself to others who have been in their career for a while, I wonder why they're not advancing as quickly. Where as a freelancer, I can't really advance because it's like my own business. Like there's only so far I can advance myself. But I do find that I would much rather start my own business than try to climb a ladder somewhere because of all these games. And I'd rather just play my own game than a big company game and try to get promoted. So I don't know why you particularly started your own business. Is it just the creative freedom, and maybe as women we don't necessarily get this freedom in other companies?
I mean, well, to be fair, I think I have had zero incidents of any kind of sexism during my career ever. So that's why I'm maybe not even the right person to ask. And I may have gotten lucky, or maybe I'm just blind, or I didn't realize when it was happening, or I didn't care about it. I don't know. But when I was 25 and Anton and I were working at FI, our male boss walked in one day and he said, Irene, you're director now. Change your LinkedIn. And I was like, what? And that's how I got promoted. You know, I didn't even ask for it. And he just walked in and told me that I was. And I think I always approach work very seriously. I take my work very, you know, as we all do, of course. And I think it's important if you are in a company to make yourself indispensable in whatever way, whatever that means. So if basically you cannot be replaced by a woman or a man, you know, you're doing your job, and you're on the way to becoming promoted. And if you're at a company where that is not respected, then you shouldn't be there. You know, not everyone belongs at every company, and you also have to make sure that you are at the place where the way they work and where their ideology is aligns with how you feel that you want to work and what you value. I mean, of course, there are a lot of very sexist companies that I know because my friends tell me about it, and I'm literally like, what? That happens? You know, that's like so Mad Men. Like, really? And it shocks me, but it happens. But I've been lucky that it hasn't happened to me. So when Anton and I started our own company, it had nothing to do with that, because actually I had gotten everything I wanted. I had a great job. I could hire whoever I wanted, and I did. And I hired talented people, whether they were male or female, didn't matter. And we had a great team, and it was a great job. But something very different popped up, and that's when you become a director and you really consider yourself a designer, and you go through the motions of managing people, I realized that I didn't love being a manager, and I think that's something that is a very totally different topic and unrelated to this, but my own company has a lot to do with the fact that I want to be a designer and I don't want to be a manager. And kudos to whoever wants to be a manager. I did it for a long time, and I know it's not for me. And, you know, that's another thing, like, I think that's maybe also a bit of a misconception, you know, that I always felt a little bit uncomfortable with, like, just because I'm a woman, I'm supposed to talk to that person, you know, because whatever, I'm, you know, like warmer or nicer or more emotional, or I can, you know, maybe more empathetic. So it's like, oh, there's a problem in the team. Maybe you should talk to them. And I'm like, why? I'm totally not empathetic at all. Like, I don't even care about this problem. You know? Like, do you know me? So it's, you know, I'm also maybe not, I don't know, whatever the typical woman is, I don't know what it is, but I know that whatever the media says is a typical woman, I definitely am not. So, I don't know. I think the important thing, though, is that you need to feel comfortable with the company culture, and if you're not, you need to move, and if you can't move, you should start your own thing. Because and that's true for anyone, whether you're an Indian or a guy or a white guy, you know? Like, just recently I was talking to a good friend of mine who's an illustrator, and she teaches at SVA, and the chair of illustration is gay. And a lot of the illustrators who teach there are now gay or female. And our one white guy, straight illustrator friend who also teaches there was like, yeah, sometimes I feel like I don't really get the cool things because I'm the straight white guy. And we just started laughing, you know? We're like, wow, that also happens, you know? So it's not that it's for women or for whatever gender you are or whatever sexuality you have. It's just you need to find your little gang that you feel comfortable with, whatever that is, and move if it's not the right fit for whatever reason.
I think one of the things that Catt, that you mentioned that is important, and something that I'm, you know, trying to do by moderating this panel with you guys, because you're awesome, is how do you develop your support network? You know, how do you get that group? You know, how have you found that in your lives? And you know, just a little bit about how that happens.
Sure. So I'm trying to think about the first time. Usually what happens is something along the lines of maybe something weird happened, or maybe you go to an event and you're like, hey, like maybe you find someone else in the room who is interested in similar things or is working at a place that's similar to where you're working, or maybe you find someone at work who maybe even is in a completely different role. For example, I've had people who aren't even in design or in product at all, but are maybe like in a completely different sector, like, you know, community service or something like that, where, you know, they're experiencing similar things. So find those people. They don't even have to be in tech, honestly, and start talking to them. Hear their problems, talk to them about your problems, ask them for advice. It could even be a person who's older than you, for example, and that's kind of how a lot of people get like mentors. Like, Stacey's pretty cool. I don't call her my mentor, but she's awesome, and she advises me sometimes, and I root her on. And so I just kind of went to different events, and I talked to people. I asked them, like, hey, you know, if something weird happens, were you okay with that? And by just even reaching out to them and saying, was that okay with you? That's how some of these little kinds of relationships start. So I've done that a lot, and over time I've started to build like Google Hangout groups and like a Slack chat, and I try to keep it really small enough so that people can connect with each other. And then we also just try to have separate outings. For example, we'll do like karaoke, or we will go to someone's house and have like a potluck or some other thing. Could also just be playing games. We've gone to arcades and all kinds of things where we're just trying to spend time with people who have in some way similar experiences to us, where we can just actually talk like normal human beings for a moment and not worry about having to have all these additional modifiers on us. So find your people. It doesn't have to be where you're working, but just find those people that make you feel like you're a human being who can be acknowledged by someone.
Next question.
Okay, 5 minutes. One thing that I'm really curious about, and I think we all are kind of in different things and in different places, is, you know, what do you think about kind of the idea of work-life balance and the difference for women work-life balance versus your male counterparts.
I have a good story.
Yeah, you're shaking.
Yeah.
You're like, you're ready. Yes, please.
I have a
go.
really good story about this. So I have no problem sharing this information. I'm 40 years old. I'm a single woman. I do not have kids. I cannot have kids. And recently I had a coworker, if I was like you and single and living at large, I would be just as successful as you. I would be just doing all these things just like you're doing. And I was like, dude, your definition of family is fucked up, right? Because sitting at home with kids and being married, that's like a very narrow definition of a social life and a family. And also, you just said a bunch of shit you should probably take back. I'm sure that's an HR violation somewhere, right? And it's this like idea of the only way that to be successful, can women have it all? Well, who defined all? Like, all for some people is a family, sure, all for some people is this, but like the idea of you have to sacrifice all this stuff to be successful, and that, and I'm looked at not being that successful because I don't have a family, so therefore I'm incomplete, and that my work, health-life balance is totally skewed because of it, because all I do is work all day long, because that's how I get successful. That whole topic is just like, should never be talked about. Like, literally. Like, don't assume. Like, be empathetic. You cannot assume what is going on in someone's life. You cannot assume that they're not taking care of a parent, or that, whatever might be going on. Like, watch what you're saying. So that to me is like, I get that a lot. I get that a lot with, Stacey's got nothing going on. She has no family commitments. She can go and do that. So I find that I'm doing more things, like I'm compensating for people. I've had that happen a lot. Like, Stacey's not going to travel for Thanksgiving. She's not going to go back to Canada to visit her family. She can work the weekend, like shit like that, right? So I started to tell people I have kids. I did. I'm like, I have 4 kids. They're like, what? And I was like, I know. It's a shock to me too. And as soon as you say that, they're just like, you shut them right down, and all of a sudden it's a different conversation. It's a funny one. But yeah, so that's a hard balance, I think, to navigate. Yeah, try following that one up, right?
And like, why do people worry so much about this? You've lived up to this point. Like, if you do have kids, you'll just figure it out. Like, you're smart. You'll figure out how you're going to prioritize, like, what's more important than other things. Like, you'll just figure it out, as you do with the rest of things in your life.
Any other last thoughts or advices, ladies?
Google Calendar. Learn to use it and love it. That's all I'm going to say.
Wow, that's so random.
Yup. All right, what I mean by that is, no, I wish. So what this means is that whatever your version of work-life balance is, whatever that means. For me, it's being able to go to work, go home, make a bunch of random stuff, and then also spend time with family and friends and whatever. And my version of family and friends is just my parents and my high school friends and college, blah, blah. So what this means is that I've had to figure out like how to prioritize and schedule these kinds of things and what to say no to. How do I know what to say no to? So what I have learned to do is to be really good with a schedule. And also recently I found this thing called an appointment calendar, which is another part of Google Calendar. And once you start saying to people, like, just look on my calendar and find a spot, things get very interesting. And I like kind of building that in, because people often ask, like, hey, like, once you start getting more well-known, people will ask you for coffee, which is a great thing that all of you should try to do. Like, if you find someone who's interesting, like, just ask them if they would want to chat over some coffee, tea, dinner, lunch, whatever. And that's a great way to also get to know people who have similar interests. But Google Calendar has been great because, again, you can just ask people, or whatever your calendar thing is, right? It doesn't have to be Google, but it works for me. So yeah, just learn whatever works for you for scheduling, learn whatever your work-life balance is, figure all of that out, and then figure out what things are highest of priority for you. Don't let other people tell you what your priorities should be. Don't let other people tell you that your work isn't valuable or your time is not valuable. And the more you start to actually block out time on your calendar, you will start to be able to like you will have a visual representation of that, and you can actually tell people like, sorry, like pay me for this time because I've got other stuff to do. It's awesome. So get money.
Well, I just want to thank all 4 of you for participating in this silly panel with me. It's been really informative and awesome. Lots of love. Thank you guys for all coming. I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks to our sponsor for thinking this was a really important, awesome thing to do. Bye.
Thank you. Aw.